morning, good evening, good afternoon. It is great to see you all. Welcome to TransAtlantic Productions, and we have an exciting guest today. I'm going to read the bio of Ilyasah Shabazz. Ilyasah Shabazz is an award-winning author, educator, and producer. She has authored 5 historical novels and has served as project advisor for the PBS award-winning film Prince Among Slaves documentary. She is co-chairperson of the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Educational Center. In her work to preserve the legacy of her parents, she has dedicated herself to institution building and intergenerational leadership development with the tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mrs. Shabazz has furthered her community impact with the City University of New York's Office of Academic Affairs, where she created curriculum to encourage higher education for underserved inner city high school dropouts. She has worked with the Office of the Mayor in Mount Vernon as Director of Public Affairs and Special Events. She founded and produced a young adult development program. The purpose of the program was to provide insight on social justice, encouraging personal empowerment. As president and founder of Ilyasah Shabazz Enterprises, she produces a variety of forums dedicated to power, possibility, and sovereignty. Ms. Shabazz is a member of the SOAR High Cabinet Committee for New Paltz College, a member of the Advisory Council for the Equal Rights Amendment Coalition, a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and she serves as a trustee for the Harlem Symphony Orchestra. Ms. Shabazz holds a Master of Science in Education and Human Resource Development from Fordham University and a Bachelor of Science in Biology from New Paltz College. Currently, she is an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City, where she teaches perspectives on justice in the Africana world. Grounded in the commitments of her parents, Ms. Shabazz emphasizes empowerment and inclusion in her teaching and scholarship. You are welcome to the show today, Ilyasah Shabazz.
Hello.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. We get a chance to talk a little bit off the stage before we come on, and we were talking about some of the most memorable things about Malcolm X. And come to find out at 82, my co-hosts were not even born when Malcolm was living. But I was just telling them that I remember going to the mosque number 7. I wasn't a member of the mosque, but when you would go and you were not a member, they would take you right down front and put you right in the front row. And Malcolm knew everybody down there were not members, so he would attempt to convert you if you would. And I was saying that one of the most memorable things about him, I'm 6'1", and Malcolm was so much taller than I. He was about 6'4", and they had this easel, and he would put up there the Bible, and on the other side he'd have the white man. He would really lay it on you. He was so powerful. He was the most powerful individual that I had ever met in my life. And I got a chance to travel with just about everybody back then. What was Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, and all of them at that time was just coming on the stage. So he was, you could feel his presence, and that he was real, and that he was committed to liberating African people, and he was really ready to die for his cause and his belief. He was so powerful that after going there a few weeks, I was a member of the church. And in fact, my father-in-law was the preacher. And I went there and just took my wife and 2 kids at the time, stood up and made my announcement that I was leaving this place because they talked about chewing gum under the seats and all that. And there was a whole revolution going on outside in the world. And they were talking about, nothing. So I just want to thank you, Ilyasah, for 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 being a guest on our program this morning. I cannot tell you how much it means, and to know that you're carrying on the legacy of your father. So the first question that I would like to ask you is, what are some of the most memorable things you recall about your father?
Well, honestly, first, it's such an honor to be here because I do recall being at, many events with my mother when she was alive. And knowing that you have a lot of footage, it's just so exciting for us, for my family to see it, but also to share some of it at the Shabazz Center, where my father was assassinated in 1965, which, today is the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz Memorial and Education Center, and I'm a co-chairperson there. My father was, yes, he was a little over 6'4", and it only adds on to the image, the presence, that he had and commanded, for young men to emulate, for young women to admire, just the stature and the righteousness of this man. And I think it's also important to understand at the time, the social climate, like, and I say politically, I say, as far as our identity and so forth is concerned. I have gone to several museums and I've seen, these renditions of my father, and they have him like 5'2", right? And he was over 6'4". And, I often talk to my students about the importance of controlling the narrative, let's make him the height that he was. We don't do nothing against short men, right? But let's give Malcolm, let's show him in his totality, right?
Mhm.
But you're probably going to ask me these questions, but these were some of the thoughts that I had while you were sharing, that my father was a young man, right? I was too young to even fully grasp what he was talking about, to fully grasp what that social climate was like, and to fully grasp the trauma that we evidently experienced when our house was firebombed and when he was assassinated right there in front of his wife and his babies. So when people ask me, what do I remember of my father, I share that it's, his beautiful smile. My mother told me when I was a child, I was one of those children that listened to no one. But when my father would call me Ilyasah, and I can still hear that, and I was just a baby, that I would stop in my tracks and turn to give my attention to my father. And, from the stories that I can remember, because my mother was just so amazing to make sure that she continued this memory, the stories of her husband, of daddy, for our household, so that we didn't grow up traumatized by the fact that our father simply was gone, so that we didn't think he left us, but that we knew that he still loved us and he was still a part of our household. Now, I've got stories, about the cookies my mother used to make, his favorite strawberry ice cream, the oatmeal cookies, and then when he was assassinated, that she would take a cookie and put it on a plate and break it in half, because I would always go to the door looking for my father. And, and she said, how do you explain death to a child that young, right? So I would take these cookies back to bed with me. And now that I'm older, we know what they do to the woman's hips. So, but fortunately we have gluten-free, we have, we're learning all these great things about digestible products.
Yes, yes. Tell me, what are some of the things you have learned from people who loved and knew your father, and your own inquiry about the impact that your father had, not only on America, but on the world?
What are some of the things? Could you just repeat that, please?
Some of the things, the impact that your father had, not on just America, but on the world? Because, and the reason why I'm asking this is that I don't really think you can have world peace without the restoration of African history and culture, because we are the foundation people of the world. And therefore, to me, Malcolm represented trying to restore that image. And as you say, who controls the narrative is who controls really the image and the storyline. So, what do you think is the impact that he had on both America, all of us, and Africa? Because he traveled there, he traveled the world.
That's right. And, I also share, again, my father was only in his 20s when the world learned of him. He was 39 when he was gunned down. He was still a very young man. And, we can even look back on our age, both of us over the age of 39. What were we doing in our 20s? What were we doing in our 30s and at 39? And this is a young man who left an enormous impact, not only here in his country, but abroad, around the world. And evidence of this is that the autobiography of Malcolm X remains required reading in many academic institutions, that the autobiography still is on the New York Times bestseller list, that young people are still drawn to Malcolm. The summer before last, when I finished writing The Awakening of Malcolm X, we discovered that Malcolm was quoted 53.7 thousand times per day in social media, which is an indication that young people are drawn to the truth. They knew that Malcolm spoke truth to power, that he did not compromise his integrity for the sake of financial gain. And he knew that it would be this generation of young people who would recognize that those in power have misused it, and that not only would they demand change, but that they would be willing to roll up their sleeves and do the necessary work. So kudos to this young generation, of leaders, right, who organized mass movements during a pandemic. Kudos to them. So my father focused on the psychological warfare of Black, Indigenous people, right? People of color. And, during the transatlantic slave trade, during human trafficking of Black bodies, we were so horribly miseducated that first of all, that there were no people here in the Americas, right, until the colonizer came. And that they brought all of the people of color to this country when there were people already here thriving, right? We see the Mayan ruins, we see the Incan ruins, we see the ruins in, all around the Americas. And, we learned about Seneca Village. We learned about so many different places. And so my father focused on the psychological warfare. We had been so traumatized.
Yes.
Thinking that everything about us, everything that God created of indigenous people, the melanin in our skin, the gravity in our hair, all of these beautiful things that God created about us, we thought were horrible. And we wanted to be like those who had colonized us, those who had traumatized us. And so when I see these, speaking excerpts of my father saying, who taught you to hate yourself? Who taught, your skin is like gold, all of these great things. It wasn't that he hated white people so much. It was that he loved his people, and he had such compassion, recognizing how badly we had been traumatized. So he focused on the psychological warfare, that Chinese people can go to China, French people could go to France, but Negroes had nowhere to go. So that we were people of African ancestry, and that Africa was our home base, and that these first world nations created thriving societies that were now being emulated and taken by others, to claim as their own. So he was fortifying us with all of this really great information so that we have the opportunity to love who we are. And I think the perfect example of that is his mentoring Muhammad Ali. And what he saw in Muhammad Ali, his young brother, is that here is, for the first time since colonization, right, that, in the 1950s and 60s, we didn't like us. We did not like Black people.
That's
And I
right.
don't know that this generation fully gets it when they see Malcolm, saying these things. He was speaking to people who had no idea who they were. And here was an opportunity for Muhammad Ali to fulfill what this kind of destiny, to be the heavyweight champion of the world, a Black man, a Muslim, who could go to other parts of the world and let young people, even grown people, because we have been so miseducated, now see someone who's saying, I'm pretty, I'm bad, I'm great, I'm the best, saying all these things, and the heavyweight champion of the world. So for the first time in a very long time, you have someone who's defying the odds, who can say, I am pretty beautiful and I am the greatest champion that ever lived. And I am an African American Black Muslim man. That's a lot.
That is your father. I love it. I really love it. But you just can't take knowledge and pour it in a person's head. They have to have a background. They have to study. They're somehow. But tell us a little bit about your grandparents who really impacted your father's life, and they were Gary High. So tell us about them and the time your father spent in prison, reading the dictionary and everything, and just he was devoted to education, to learning, and that is something that our young people must understand, that commitment to learning.
That's right. And it was important to me why I wrote a lot of the books that I wrote, but especially The Awakening of Malcolm X. I thought it was really, again, important to control the narrative. And this gave me an opportunity not only to control the narrative of my father's foundation, but also to control the narrative about mass incarceration, that young people who are going into prisons, they're not going, they're fearless, they're petrified, right? That they have been 9 times out of 10 suffering from some form of PTSD, right? And so you have Malcolm, who is a young man. He was born to Reverend Earl Little and Louise Norton Little. And it was a wonderful home of learning, of identity. They were Garveyites. That the Marcus Garvey movement, Universal Negro Improvement Association, in the 1920s, commanded millions of followers worldwide, that his father was the chapter president, that his mother was the recording secretary, that, I just posted today on my Instagram that his father sent a letter to then President Coolidge when they arrested Marcus Garvey for these alleged mail fraud charges, informing the President of the United States that they have falsely arrested this man. And if he would do the right thing, he is certain that God would reward him in his afterlife. And so they did. They released Marcus Garvey. And so his father, very big, obviously where he got his height, 6'5", tall, stocky Black man, was speaker, much like Malcolm came to be. He was much like, when I look at some of the writings of my grandfather, my father is so much like him. They all thought that he was invincible, and his mother was the recording secretary who instilled the love of humanity, the love of literature, understanding the importance of being seeing yourself as a global citizen. And she would read, different newspapers and periodicals with her children from Grenada, where she was from, and so forth. But one of the great things that I discovered, and so when you take a young man and you lynch his father because his father purchased land, premium property that was then reserved for whites only, and he was lynched, right? His mother was 7 years later was put in an institution against her will. Their land was seized. Today, projects are on the land. And the judge at the time, his name is on the land, the deed, the property. And so when you take a young person and you remove the people who care about them, and you remove the people who are guiding, nurturing, educating these children, then your children are forced to identify with whatever society says they should be, right? And so you have Malcolm, who is running away from himself against the backdrop of Jim Crow as a young man after his parents are gone and his family is separated. And this is much like young people today, Black Lives Matter. When you find yourself at a crossroads and you're in a lot of pain, you don't say, oh, I'm going to go and get a good education, right? Unless you have some inner, burning desire to have a great education. And so my father participated in self-destruction until he went to jail at a young age, 19, 18, no, he wasn't quite 18 years old. And all of the things from which he was running, he confronted. And so he became Malcolm X. And, also an opportunity to look at mass incarceration, right? Brian Stevenson says that we are more than the worst mistake we've ever made. And if we're going to rehabilitate, then let's really do so. And let's not rely on, as my father said, you can't, only a fool would sit back and allow his enemy to teach his children. So we can't allow our children to just be thrown away into these, into prison industrial complex.
Can you talk a little bit about the figures of the industrial complex, the kind of money that's thrown in, the privatization of these prisons? I think that is important because all of that is a part of how we are continually enslaved systematically, and how the system uses the prison system, really, if you look at the numbers and the money that's put into it, to enrich themselves and at the same time destroy the black community, especially black males. And now the prison population is growing by leaps and bounds with black women. Can you talk about the economy of that some and the figures that are reflected there?
That's right. And it's funny, I'm looking around because I used to have these stats. I'm not teaching this semester, but I always have the stats that I share with my students, and I don't know where they are, but I think it's something like, I'm not sure if it's $80 billion or $8 billion of tax-paying dollars that are invested into the prison industrial system, complex system, where we could use these funds to help these high costs of college tuitions, right? We could use these funds to invest in children's after-school program. I know when I grew up, there were a lot of after-school programs And, to think that we are taking so much money and we're putting it into, and we're paying for it, that we're putting it into this prison industrial complex for our children. We know that it is, gosh, I think the black and brown or I just said the black population has increased 700% since,
Wow.
and the numbers, I wish I had it. I always have them, but that these numbers are just unbelievable.
Wow. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And that is so.
Oh, here it is. There are approximately 3 million people in our nation's prisons. Since 1970, with Nixon's war on drugs, right? And we know that this war on drugs was announced before the drugs even landed in America, increased by 700%.
Wow.
In 2012, the United States spent $81 billion taxpayer dollars on correction facilities, right? So that's not education or assistance with skyrocketing tuition or even after school programs. And so, it's an opportunity for us to focus on the humanity of inmates while also providing more accurate information about this prison industrial complex.
Thank you so much. And one of the things I like to point out, since we're on this topic, not leaving it right now because it's so important, but there are private prisons are privatized, and within the contracts that they make with the states, that the states have to keep those prisons, I think 90% filled to capacity. And where are they going to get the people to fill those prisons outside of right from our community, which is where you had, say, like in New York State, stop and frisk. I mean, I was on the street, I filmed it, where the police just come by and group of young black people on the corner or whatever, throw them up against the wall, search them, and there was like hundreds of thousands of kids who ended up in jail with a record, because once they give you a record, they have you can't then get a job on the police department. You can't get a job on the fire department. You can't. I mean, it was one way of just wiping out. And these kids weren't doing anything. I mean, maybe they found some drugs on. Now drugs is legal. I mean, but your father literally went into all of these issues even before they were issues. I mean, these are things that he spoke about to try to get us to understand that the system, it was systematic in the way that it imprisoned us and destroyed us. So if you could tell us a little bit about, now the school is named after your mother in Chicago, and so many of the schools that are being established, they don't live up to the ideology of the Harrisms and Shearisms that they are named after. How do you think is the best way to teach our young people our history? And the reason why I'm throwing it out there is because just like Meg Evers College, I'm very familiar with Meg Evers College, but many of the students at Meg Evers College don't really know who Meg Evers was or what his sacrifice was and so forth. So if you're going to have a name, so if you have schools that have names after these famous people, don't you think the ideology should at least be taught? What's the best way to teach our children so that they are not continuously under the umbrella of the ideology of white supremacy?
That's right. That's right. And this is one of the reasons why I follow you and listen to a lot of the information that you provide, because it is good to be reminded and to be surrounded by like-minded, compassionate people, because I don't think that we can focus on who's not doing whatever we think they should be doing. The focus should be on providing the information so that this generation makes sure that it's done. And so, I just recently, in the last few years, joined the sorority, the Delta Academy. The Delta Sigma Thetas. And within it, they have an academy, the Dr. Betty Shabazz Academy, which is for young girls, 11 to 14, to come in and be empowered and inspired and prepared as they approach their teens in the world and so forth. And so, I just, was like, listen, every single thing these young girls do should be surrounded by, this is what Betty loved. This is who Betty was. So that we're in this program, but we also know who this woman is. I think there's enough information. Oftentimes we've been so traumatized ourselves. We're just grateful that we have the opportunity to have our children in classrooms. And again, it's this generation who's taking it the step further. They stand on our shoulders, who are saying, okay, fantastic. There are schools named after these people. There are programs named after these great leaders. But let's also teach them about who these people are, that from after whom they're named. And so, my thing is, it's not just for Black children.
Yes.
It's for all children, right?
Yes.
Because we're talking about truth.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about an entire identity, an entire history that has been taken, right? Yeah. And occupied by someone else, right?
Mm.
We're wearing our masks, right? That's our history. So it's important that we take back our history and provide accurate information for all children, not just Black children. All children need to know about the cradle of civilization, right? If we learned about, well, first of all, we understand scientists continually uncover ruins, right, in Africa, ruins in Australia, all these indigenous places, and discover that there were doctors, there were astrologists, there were scientists, farmers, and the likes, right? And that they were Black. And this is the cradle of humanity, right? Yes. So that means that everyone should want to know about the foundation of our humanity. And it is our responsibility to take back the stuff that was stolen from us, right? We're not the crooks. And so we take it back. We make sure that our children learn about the empires of Benin, the empires of Ghana, these empires, just as they learn about the Roman Empire, right? Just as they learn about all of these things. And so if we understood that, if we understood the, what happened in Wall Street, the massacres, the racial massacres in Wall Street, and in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Rosewood, Florida, were just as American as the Boston Tea Party, then perhaps we have an opportunity to make sure that all children are learning truth, honesty, compassion, that these are the values that we're instilling in them, and not racism, hatred, discrimination, this false sense of superiority, right? And so I think that, that's every human being. And I think that's what my father would say. It's every human being's responsibility to make sure that we are teaching our children truth.
That's why I asked you the question earlier. Can there be world peace without the truth of African history and culture? Because we are the foundation people of the planet, and everybody else comes out of a I won't say mutation, but we're the mothers and fathers of everybody. So the world is one through the blood of Africa.
That's
And
right.
today, every country is armed to the teeth, and every country has its fingers on the trigger. And it will only take an accident to trigger off a nuclear war, etc., when through the blood of African people, we're all one people. We're all cousins and sisters and brothers. And I find that in your father's teaching as well, that we can't have world peace unless we do away with the lie, which you just explained, is how our culture has been stolen and presented back to us through somebody else's culture and image. Because people see you as they imagine you to be, as the image of you is projected. If the image of you is projected as a criminal and a thief and somebody who did not contribute anything to the world, then that's the way you're going to be treated. So again, I would like for you to, project in your own words, how can there be world peace without the understanding of the contributions of African people through their own culture? And literally all knowledge came through African people, but it has been attributed to others. How do you best express that?
Well, I love what you just said, and you should tweet that, tweet, post, whatever. The world is one out of the blood of Africa. And that is something that, I mean, first of all, this is the truth. They want to call it critical race theory, and people are rejecting it, right? But this is what you call just truth in education. And I think that we owe our children the right to understand these values of truth, these values of honesty, these values of compassion versus values of racism, values of discrimination, values, as such. I don't know how to turn this line off. I'm going to tell you.
I understand. Um, but I want to give you as much time as you need to um, present your understanding and vision of that, because we're talking about a foundational understanding in order to maybe save humanity. I mean, we're looking at destroying the world through global warming and all of that. But I think that this is equally important, if not the next most important, to saving the planet and bringing the world. And that's to an understanding that truth is also important. And that was a part of your father's message. Truth, what Africans call ma'at, truth, harmony, balance, justice. And that's what he fought for. That was a part of his message. And he did it like nobody else did it. I mean, we look at him, and as you were talking about, you mentioned, well, you didn't mention Dr. King, but people are always trying to throw Dr. King, and your father as somehow opposites, but actually they were coming closer and closer together, both in their actions and in their thoughts. Can you speak about it?
I just think it's so unfortunate when we learn about Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, right? We learn about the significant contributions that they made to their country, not to humanity, but to their country.
Mm-hmm.
But when we learn about Black people, people of color, like W.e.b. Du Bois, like um, uh, Booker T. Washington, it's always from opposing ends. And so it's these divisive tactics. You're on either on one side or the other side. And there's this famous man who's a very dear friend of mine, who's in, the public, who always says, well, I'm on the side of Dr. King. And I'm thinking, that's not the question. The question is, how do we resolve these injustices, right? And my father said that rather focus on the differences, let's focus on what we have in common, right? And the focus is, how are we going to instill a curriculum for all children that's based on truth, we're giving our children their value system, right? And so we want to give a value system that's based on truth, honesty, right? That's based on compassion, forgiveness, character, right? We want to instill these values, this value system in our children, rather than instilling this value system that's divisive, right? So we're going to learn about Dr. King and his significant contributions that he made. We're going to learn about Malcolm X and his significant contributions that he made, and so forth and so on, without teaching our children that we have to choose one over the other, and that we're going to choose who you say is the most palatable, right? So I think really the focus with the work that I do is understanding the necessity to control the narrative, to participate in the narrative that's being shared. Otherwise, what good are we, right? My father said the ballot or the bullet. He didn't say the bullet or the ballot. He said the ballot, right? That means we have to do the work. And if that doesn't work, then there's a bullet. But he didn't say the bullet or the ballot. The ballot means you do the necessary work, right? And also understanding Malcolm was brilliant, but Malcolm used his, teaching depending on who his audience was. And so if his audience were people who had been disenfranchised for generation upon generation, have no idea about their beauty and their Blackness, have no idea about, the God that is within them, have no idea about what Africa is and the empires that preceded them, right? If they have no idea, then he has to talk to them on that level. And if he needs to talk to you, and so I think that all of these things are important.
Ilyasah, I know our time is running down, but there's one more question I want to ask you. There's been 2 documentaries, Blood Brothers and Who Killed Malcolm X, that have been released in the last couple years. What did you learn anything from those documentaries that you maybe didn't know? I mean, I'd like to know. I'd like to know, if there was anything there that. What can you speak of?
Well, I think what's really important is to understand that this time period, right, is the Jim Crow era of race discrimination and legal subjugation of African Americans, of people of African ancestry, people of color, right? I believe that what you do in the dark eventually comes to light. And I believe that this is what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Listen, it's been marvelous. It's been wonderful talking with you.
It has.
And I look forward. Can we do this again?
Absolutely.
Okay,
No.
wonderful. Because we got so much to cover. We could possibly do this in one episode. So um, I want to thank you, and I'm looking forward to another session with you at least. So again, thank you. And to our audience, we're so glad you're here. Hit the like button and become a part of us, and we'll keep you informed on what we're doing. Peace and power. God bless you.